perhaps that end was not for this day, maybe not for this year. Who knew? 20 years might yet pass ere that end came. Emerging from the jungle, he came upon a queer ridge of what looked like long disintegrated lava rock. Here he left no trail, and he proceeded carefully on beyond it through further jungle, believing once again in his star that would enable him to elude pursuit. His plan of escape took shape. He would find a safe hiding place until after dark. Then he would circle back to the lake and the whirl of waters. That gained, nothing and nobody could stop him. He had but to leap in. The subterranean journey had no terrors for him because he had done it before, and in his fancy he saw once more the pleasant picture of the Gualaca River flashing under the open sky on its way to the sea. Besides, did he not carry with him the 2 great emeralds and 2 great rubies that had been the eyes of Chia and Hertzutzel? Fortune enough and vast good fortune were they for any man. What if he had failed by the Maya treasure to become the richest man in the world? He was satisfied. All he wanted now was darkness, and one last dive into the heart of the mountain and through the heart of the mountain to the Gualaca flowing to the sea. And just then the assured vision of his escape so vividly filling his eyes that he failed to observe the way of his feet, he dived. Nor was it a dive into swirling waters. It was a head-foremost, dry land dive down a slope of rock. So slippery was it that he continued to slide down, although he managed to turn around with face and stomach to the surface and to claw wildly up with hands and feet. Such effort merely slowed his descent, but could not stop it. For a while at the bottom he lay breathless and dazed. When his senses came back to him, he became aware first of all of something unusual upon which his hand rested. He could have sworn that he felt teeth. At length, opening his eyes with a shudder and summoning his resolution, he dared to look at the object. And relief was immediate. Teeth they were, in an indubitable weather-white jawbone, but they were pig's teeth, and the jaw was a pig's jaw. Other bones lay about, on which his body rested, which, on examination, proved to be the bones of pigs and of smaller animals. Where had he glimpsed such an arrangement of bones, he thought, and remembered the Queen's great golden bowl. He looked up. Ah, Mother of God, the very place! He knew it at first sight as he gazed up what was a funnel at the far spectacle of day. Fully 200 feet above him was the rim of the funnel. The sides of hard, smooth rock sloped steeply in and down to him, and his eyes and judgment told him that no man born of woman could ever scale that slope. The fancy that came to his mind caused him to spring to his feet in sudden panic and look hastily round about him. Only on a more colossal scale, the funnel in which he was trapped had reminded him of the funnel pits dug in the sand by hunting spiders that lurked at the bottom for such prey that tumbled in upon them. And, his vivid fancy leaping, he had been frightened by the thought that some spider monster, as colossal as the funnel pit, might possibly be lurking there to devour him. But no such denizen occurred. The bottom of the pit, circular in form, was a good 10 feet across and carpeted he knew not how deep by a debris of small animals' bones. Now for what had the Mayas of old time made so tremendous an excavation, he questioned, for he was more than half convinced that the funnel was no natural phenomenon. Before nightfall he made sure, by a dozen attempts, that the funnel was unscalable. Between attempts he crouched in the growing shadow of the descending sun and panted, dry-lipped with heat and thirst. The place was a very furnace, and the juices of his body were wrung from him in profuse perspiration. Throughout the night, between dozes, he vainly pondered the problem of escape. The only way out was up, nor could his mind devise any method of getting up. Also, he looked forward with terror to the coming of the day, for he knew that no man could survive a full 10 hours of the baking heat that would be his. Ere the next nightfall, the last drop of moisture would have evaporated from his body, leaving him a withered and already half sun-dried mummy. With the coming of daylight, his growing terror added wings to his thought, and he achieved a new and profoundly simple theory of escape. Since he could not climb up, and since he could not get out through the sides themselves, then the only possible remaining way was down. Fool that he was! He might have been working through the cool night hours, and now he must labor in the quickly increasing heat. He applied himself in an ecstasy of energy to digging down through the mass of crumbling bones. Of course there was a way out, else how did the funnel drain? Otherwise it would have been full or part full of water from the rains. Fool, and thrice times thrice a fool! He dug down one side of the wall, flinging the rubbish into a mound against the opposite side. So desperately did he apply himself that he broke his fingernails to the quick and deeper, while every fingertip was lacerated to bleeding. But love of life was strong in him, and he knew it was a life and death race with the sun. As he went deeper, the rubbish became more compact, so that he used the muzzle of his rifle like a crowbar to loosen it, ere tossing it up in single and double handfuls. By mid-forenoon, his senses beginning to reel in the heat, he made a discovery. Upon the wall which he had uncovered, he came upon the beginning of an inscription, evidently rudely scratched in the rock by the point of a knife. With renewed hope, his head and shoulders down in the hole, he dug and scratched for all the world like a dog, throwing the rubbish out and between his legs in true dog fashion. Some of it fell clear, but most of it fell back and down upon him, yet had he become too frantic to note the inefficiency of his effort. At last the inscription was cleared, so that he was able to read Peter McGill of Glasgow. On March 12, 1820, I escaped from the pit of hell by this passage, by digging down and finding it. A passage. The passage must be beneath the inscription. Torres now toiled in a fury. So dirt-soiled was he that he was like some huge, four-legged, earth-burrowing animal. The dirt got into his eyes and, on occasion, into his nostrils and air passages, so as to suffocate him and compel him to back up out of the hole and sneeze and cough his breathing apparatus clear. Twice he fainted, but the sun by then almost directly overhead drove him on. He found the upper rim of the passage. He did not dig down to the lower rim. For the moment the aperture was large enough to accommodate his lean shape. He writhed and squirmed into it and away from the destroying sun rays. The cool and the dark soothed him, but his joy and the reaction from what he had undergone sent his pulse giddily up, so that for the third time he fainted. Recovered, mouthing with black and swollen lips a half-insane chant of gratefulness and thanksgiving, he crawled on along the passage. Perforce he crawled, because it was so low that a dwarf could not have stood erect in it. The place was a charnel house. Bones crunched and crumbled under his hands and knees, and he knew that his knees were being worn to the bone. At the end of 100 feet he caught his first glimmering of light. But the nearer he approached freedom, the slower he progressed, for the final stages of exhaustion were coming upon him. He knew that it was not physical exhaustion nor food exhaustion, but thirst exhaustion. Water, a few ounces of water, was all he needed to make him strong again, and there was no water. But the light was growing stronger and nearer. He noted, toward the last, that the floor of the passage pitched down at an angle of fully 30 degrees. This made the way easier. Gravity drew him on, and helped every failing effort of him toward the source of light. Very close to it, he encountered an increase in the deposit of bones. Yet they bothered him little, for they had become an old story while he was too exhausted to mind them. He did observe, with swimming eyes and increasing numbness of touch, that the passage was contracting both vertically and horizontally. Slanting downward at 30 degrees, it gave him an impression of a rat trap, himself the rat, descending head foremost toward he knew not what. Even before he reached it, he apprehended that the slit of bright day that advertised the open world beyond was too narrow for the egress of his body, and his apprehension was verified. crawling unconcernedly over a skeleton that the blaze of day showed him to be a man's. He managed, by severely and painfully squeezing his ears flat back, to thrust his head through the slitted aperture. The sun beat down upon his head, while his eyes drank in the openness of the freedom of the world that the unyielding rock denied to the rest of his body. Most maddening of all was a running stream not 100 yards away, tree-fringed beyond, with lush meadow grass leading down to it from his side. And in the tree-shadowed water, knee-deep and drowsing, stood several cows of the dwarf breed peculiar to the Valley of Lost Souls. Occasionally they flicked their tails lazily at flies, or changed the distribution of their weight on their legs. He glared at them to see them drink, but they were evidently too sated with water. Fools! Why should they not drink, with all that wealth of water flowing idly by? They betrayed alertness, turning their heads toward the far bank and pricking their ears forward. Then, as a big antlered buck came out from among the trees to the water's edge, they flattened their ears back and shook their heads and pawed the water till he could hear the splashing. But the stag disdained their threats, lowered his head, and drank. This was too much for Torres, who emitted a maniacal scream which, had he been in his senses, he would not have recognized as proceeding from his own throat and larynx. The stag sprang away. The cattle turned their heads in Torres's direction, drowsed, their eyes shut, and resumed the flicking of flies. With a violent effort, scarcely knowing that he had half torn off his ears, he drew his head back through the slitted aperture and fainted on top of the skeleton. 2 hours later, though he did not know the passage of time, he regained consciousness and found his own head cheek by jowl with the skull of the skeleton on which he lay. The descending sun was already shining into the narrow opening, and his gaze chanced upon a rusty knife. The point of it was worn and broken, and he established the connection. This was the knife that had scratched the inscription on the rock at the base of the funnel at the other end of the passage, and this skeleton was the bony framework of the man who had done the scratching. And Alvarez Torres went immediately mad. "Ah, Peter McGill, my enemy," he muttered. "Peter McGill of Glasgow, who betrayed me to this end. This for you, and this, and this." So speaking, he drove the heavy knife into the fragile front of the skull. The dust of the bone which had once been the tabernacle of Peter McGill's brain arose in his nostrils and increased his frenzy. He attacked the skeleton with his hands, tearing at it, disrupting it, filling the pent space about him with flying bones. It was like a battle in which he destroyed what was left of the mortal remains of the one-time resident of Glasgow. Once again, Torres squeezed his head through the slit to gaze at the fading glory of the world. Like a rat in the trap caught by the neck in the trap of ancient Maya devising, he saw the bright world and day dimmed to darkness as his final consciousness drowned in the darkness of death. But still the cattle stood in the water and drowsed and flicked at flies, and, later, the stag returned, disdainful of the cattle, too. Chapter 28. Not for nothing had Regan been named by his associates the Wolf of Wall Street. While usually no more than a conservative, large-scale player, ever so often like a periodical drinker, he had to go on a rampage of wild and daring stock gambling. At least 5 times in his long career had he knocked the bottom out of the market or lifted the roof off, and each time to the tune of a personal gain of millions. He never went on a small rampage, and he never went too often. He would let years of quiescence slip by, until suspicion of him was lulled asleep, and his world deemed that the wolf was at last grown old and peaceable. And then, like a thunderbolt, he would strike at the men and interests he wished to destroy. But, though the blow always fell like a thunderbolt, not like a thunderbolt was it in its inception. Long months and even years were spent in deviously preparing for the day and painstakingly maturing the plans and conditions for the battle. Thus had it been in the outlining and working up of the impending Waterloo for Francis Morgan. Revenge lay back of it, but it was revenge against a dead man. Not Francis, but Francis's father was the one he struck against, although he struck through the living into the heart of the grave to accomplish it. 8 years he had waited and sought his chance ere old R.H.M. Richard Henry Morgan had died, but no chance had he found. He was, truly, the Wolf of Wall Street, but never by any luck had he found an opportunity against the Lion, for to his death R.H.M. had been known as the Lion of Wall Street. So, from father to son, always under a show of fair appearance, Reagan had carried the feud over. Yet Reagan's very foundation on which he built for revenge was meretricious and wrongly conceived. True, 8 years before R.H.M.'s death he had tried to double-cross him and failed, but he never dreamed that R.H.M. had guessed. Yet R.H.M. had guessed. Had not only guessed, but had ascertained beyond any shadow of doubt, and had promptly and cleverly double-crossed his treacherous associate. Thus, had Reagan known that R.H.M. knew of his perfidy, Reagan would have taken his medicine without thought of revenge. As it was, believing that R.H.M. was as bad as himself, believing that R.H.M., out of meanness as mean as his own, without provocation or suspicion, had done this foul thing to him, he saw no way to balance the account save by ruining him, or, in lieu of him, by ruining his son. And Reagan had taken his time. At first, Francis had left the financial game alone, content with letting his money remain safely in the safe investments into which it had been put by his father. Not until Francis had become for the first time active in undertaking Tampico Petroleum to the tune of millions of investment with an assured many millions of ultimate returns, had Reagan had the ghost of a chance to destroy him. But, the chance given, Reagan had not wasted time, though his slow and thorough campaign had required many months to develop. Ere he was done, he came very close to knowing every share of whatever stock Francis carried on margin or owned outright. It had really taken 2 years and more for Reagan to prepare. In some of the corporations in which Francis owned heavily, Reagan was himself a director and no inconsiderable arbiter of destiny. In Frisco Consolidated he was president. In New York, Vermont, and Connecticut he was vice president. From controlling one director in Northwestern Electric, he had played kitchen politics until he controlled the 2/3 majority. And so with all the rest, either directly or indirectly through corporation and banking ramifications, he had his hand in the secret springs and levers of the financial and business mechanism which gave strength to Francis's fortune. Yet no one of these was more than a bagatelle compared with the biggest thing of all, Tampico Petroleum. In this, beyond the paltry 20,000 shares bought on the open market, Reagan owned nothing, controlled nothing, though the time was growing ripe for him to sell and deal and juggle in inordinate quantities. Tampico Petroleum was practically Francis's private preserve. A number of his friends were, for them, deeply involved, Mrs. Carruthers even gravely so. She worried him and was not even above pestering him over the telephone. There were others, like Johnny Pathmore, who never bothered him at all, and who, when they met, talked carelessly and optimistically about the condition of the market and financial things in general, all of which was harder to bear than Mrs. Carruthers' perpetual nervousness. Northwestern Electric, thanks to Reagan's machinations, had actually dropped 30 points and remained there. Those on the outside who thought they knew regarded it as positively shaky. Then there was the little old solid as the rock of Gibraltar Frisco Consolidated. The nastiest of rumors were afloat and the talk of a receivership was growing emphatic. Montana load was still sickly under Mulhaney's unflattering and unmodified report, and Weston, the great expert sent out by the English investors, had failed to report anything reassuring. For 6 months, Imperial Tungsten, earning nothing, had been put to disastrous expense in the great strike which seemed only just begun. Nor did anybody, save the several labor leaders who knew, dream that it was Reagan's gold that was at the bottom of the affair. The secrecy and the deadliness of the attack was what unnerved Bascom. All properties in which Francis was interested were being pressed down as if by a slow-moving glacier. There was nothing spectacular about the movement, merely a steady, persistent decline that made Francis's large fortune shrink horribly. And, along with what he owned outright, what he held on margin suffered even greater shrinkage. Then had come rumors of war. Ambassadors were receiving their passports right and left, and half the world seemed mobilizing. This was the moment, with the markets shaken and panicky, and with the world powers delaying in declaring moratoriums, that Reagan selected to strike. The time was ripe for a bear raid, and with him were associated half a dozen other big bears who tacitly accepted his leadership. But even they did not know the full extent of his plans, nor guess at the specific direction of them. They were in the raid for what they could make, and thought he was in it for the same reason, in their simple directness of pecuniary vision, catching no glimpse of Francis Morgan, nor of his ghostly father at whom the big blow was being struck. Reagan's rumor factory began work in overtime, and the first to drop and the fastest to drop in the dropping market were the stocks of Francis, which had already done considerable dropping ere the bear market began. Yet Reagan was careful to bring no pressure on Tampico Petroleum. Proudly it held up its head in the midst of the general slump, and eagerly Reagan waited for the moment of desperation when Francis would be forced to dump it on the market to cover his shrunken margins in other lines. Lord, Lord! Bascom held the side of his face in the palm of one hand and grimaced as if he had a jumping toothache. Lord, Lord, he reiterated. The market's gone to smash and Tampico Pet along with it. How she slumped! Who'd have dreamed it? Francis, puffing steadily away at a cigarette and quite oblivious that it was unlighted, sat with Bascom in the latter's private office. It looks like a fire sale, he vouchsafed. That won't last longer than this time tomorrow morning. Then you'll be sold out, and me with you, his broker simplified with a swift glance at the clock. It marked 12, as Francis's swiftly automatic glance verified. Dump in the rest of Tampico Pet, he said wearily. That ought to hold back until tomorrow. Then what tomorrow? His broker demanded, with the bottom out and everybody, including the office boys, selling short. Francis shrugged his shoulders. You know I've mortgaged the house, Dreamworld, and the Adirondack camp to the limit. Have you any friends? At such a time, Francis countered bitterly. Well, it's the very time, Bascom retorted. Look here, Morgan, I know the set you ran with at college. There's Johnny Pathmore. Oh, and he's up to his eyes already. When I smash, he smashes. And Dave Donaldson will have to readjust his life to about 160 a month. And as for Chris Westhouse, he'll have to take to the movies for a livelihood. He always was good at theatricals, and I happen to know he's got the ideal film face. There's Charlie Tippery, Bascom suggested, though it was patent that he was hopeless about it. Yes, Francis agreed with equal hopelessness. There's only one thing the matter with him. His father still lives. The old cuss never took a flyer in his life, Bascom supplemented. There's never a time he can't put his hand on millions. And he still lives, worse luck. Charlie could get him to do it, and would, except the one thing that's the matter with me. No securities left, his broker queried. Francis nodded. Catch the old man parting with $1 without due security. Nevertheless, a few minutes later, hoping to find Charlie Tippery in his office during the noon hour, Francis was sending in his card. Of all jewelers and gem merchants in New York, the Tippery establishment was the greatest. Not only that, it was esteemed the greatest in the world. More of the elder Tippery's money was invested in the great diamond corner than even those in the know of most things knew of this particular thing. The interview was as Francis had forecast. The old man still held tight reins on practically everything, and the son had little hope of winning his assistance. "I know him," he told Francis, "and though I'm going to wrestle with him, don't pin an iota of faith on the outcome. I'll go to the mat with him, but that will be about all. The worst of it is that he has the ready cash, to say nothing of oodles and oodles of safe securities and United States bonds. But you see, Grandfather Tippery, when he was young and struggling and founding the business, once loaned a friend 1,000. He never got it back, and he never got over it. Nor did Father Tippery ever get over it either. The experience seared both of them. Why, Father wouldn't lend a penny on the North Pole unless he got the pole for security after having had it expertly appraised. And you haven't any security, you see. But I'll tell you what. I'll wrestle with the old man tonight after dinner. That's his most amiable mood of the day. And I'll hustle around on my own and see what I can do. Oh, I know a few 100,000 won't mean anything, and I'll do my darndest for something big. Whatever happens, I'll be at your house at 9 tomorrow. Which will be my busy day, Francis smiled wanly as they shook hands. I'll be out of the house by 8. And I'll be there by 8 then, Charlie Tippery responded, again wringing his hand heartily. And in the meantime, I'll get busy. There are ideas already beginning to sprout. Another interview Francis had that afternoon. Arrived back at his broker's office, Bascom told him that Reagan had called up and wanted to see Francis, saying that he had some interesting information for him. "I'll run around right away," Francis said, reaching for his hat while his face lighted up with hope. He was an old friend of Father's, and if anybody could pull me through, he could. "Don't be too sure." Bascom shook his head and paused reluctantly a moment before making confession. "I called him up just before you returned from Panama. I was very frank. I told him of your absence and of your perilous situation here and— oh, yes, flatly and flat out. Asked him if I could rely on him in case of need, and he baffled. You know anybody can baffle when asked a favor. That was all right. But I thought I sensed more, no, I won't dare to say enmity. But I will say that I was impressed. How shall I say? Well, that he struck me as being particularly and peculiarly cold-blooded and non-committal." "Nonsense," Francis laughed. "He was too good a friend of my father's." "Ever heard of the Cosmopolitan Railways merger?" Bascom queried with significant irrelevance. Francis nodded promptly, then said, "But that was before my time. I merely have heard of it, that's all. Shoot, tell me about it. Give me the weight of your mind." "Too long a story, but take this one word of advice. If you see Regan, don't put your cards on the table. Let him play first, and, if he offers, let him offer without solicitation from you. Of course, I may be all wrong, but it won't damage you to hold up your hand and get his play." At the end of another half-hour, Francis was closeted with Reagan, and the stress of his peril was such that he controlled his natural impulses, remembering Bascom's instruction, and was quite fairly nonchalant about the state of his affairs. He even bluffed. "In pretty deep, eh?" was Reagan's beginning. "Oh, not so deep that my back teeth are awash yet," Francis replied airily. "I can still breathe, and it will be a long time before I begin swallowing." Regan did not immediately reply. Instead, pregnantly, he ran over the last few yards of the ticker tape. "You're dumping Tampico Pet pretty heavily just the same." "And they're snapping it up," Francis came back, and for the first time in a maze of wonderment, he considered the possibility of Bascom's intuition being right. "Sure, I've got them swallowing." Just the same, you'll note that Tampico Pet is tumbling at the same time it's being snapped up, which is a very curious phenomenon, Regan urged. In a bear market, all sorts of curious phenomena occur, Francis bluffed with a mature show of wisdom, and when they've swallowed enough of my dumpings, they'll be ripe to roll on a barrel. Somebody will pay something to get my dumpings out of their system. I fancy they'll pay through the nose before I'm done with them. But you're all in, boy. I've been watching your fight even before your return. Tampico Pet is your last. Francis shook his head. I'd scarcely say that, he lied. I've got assets my market enemies never dream of. I'm luring them on, that's all, just luring them on. Of course, Regan, I'm telling you this in confidence. You were my father's friend. Mine is going to be some cleanup, and, if you'll take my tip, in this short market you start buying, you'll be sure to settle with the sellers long in the end. What are your other assets? Francis shrugged his shoulders. That's what they're going to find out when they're full up with my stuff. It's a bluff, Regan admired explosively. You've got the old man's nerve, all right, but you've got to show me it isn't bluff. Regan waited, and Francis was suddenly inspired. It is, he muttered. You've named it. I'm drowning over my back teeth now, and they're the highest out of the wash. But I won't drown if you will help me. All you've got to do is to remember my father and put out your hand to save his son. If you'll back me up, we'll make them all sick. And right there the Wolf of Wall Street showed his teeth. He pointed to Richard Henry Morgan's picture. Why do you think I kept that hanging on the wall all these years? He demanded. Francis nodded as if the one accepted explanation was their tried and ancient friendship. Guess again, Regan sneered grimly. Francis shook his head in perplexity. So I shouldn't ever forget him, the wolf went on, and never a waking moment have I forgotten him. Remember the Conmopolitan Railways merger? Well, old RHM double-crossed me in that deal. And it was some double cross, believe me. But he was too cunning ever to let me get a comeback on him. So there his picture has hung, and here I've sat and waited. And now the time has come. You mean? Francis queried quietly. Just that, Regan snarled. I've waited and worked for this day, and the day has come. I've got the whelp where I want him at any rate. He glanced up maliciously at the picture. And if that don't make the old gent turn in his grave. Francis rose to his feet and regarded his enemy curiously. No, he said, as if in soliloquy, it isn't worth it. What isn't worth what? The other demanded with swift suspicion. Beating you up, was the cool answer. I could kill you with my hands in 5 minutes. You're no wolf, you're just mere yellow dog, the part of you that isn't plain skunk. They told me to expect this of you, but I didn't believe, and I came to see. They were right. You were all that they said. Well, I must get along out of this. It smells like a den of foxes. It stinks. He paused with his hand on the doorknob and looked back. He had not succeeded in making Regan lose his temper. And what are you going to do about it? The latter jeered. If you'll permit me to get my broker on your phone, maybe you'll learn, Francis replied. Go to it, my lady buck, Regan conceded, then with a wave of suspicion, I'll get him for you myself. And, having ascertained that Bascom was really at the other end of the line, he turned the receiver over to Francis. You were right, the latter assured Bascom. Regan's all you said and worse. Go right on with your plan of campaign. We've got him where we want him, though the old fox won't believe it for a moment. He thinks he's going to strip me, clean me out. Francis paused to think up the strongest way of carrying on his bluff, then continued. I'll tell you something you don't know. He's the one who maneuvered the raid from the beginning. So now you know who we're going to bury. And after a little more of similar talk, he hung up. "You see," he explained again from the door, "you were so crafty that we couldn't make out who it was. Why, hell, Reagan, we were prepared to give a walloping to some unknown that had several times your strength. And now that it's you, it's easy. We were prepared to strain. But with you, it will be a walkover. Tomorrow, around this time, there's going to be a funeral right here in your office, and you're not going to be one of the mourners. You're going to be the corpse, and a not nice-looking financial corpse you'll be when we get done with you." "The dead spit of RHM," the wolf grinned. "Lord, how he could pull off a bluff. It's a pity he didn't bury you and save me all the trouble," was Francis's parting shot. "And all the expense," Regan flung after him. "It's going to be pretty expensive for you, and there isn't going to be any funeral from this place." "Well, tomorrow's the day," Francis delivered to Bascom as they parted that evening. "This time tomorrow I'll be a perfectly nice scalped and skinned and sun-dried and smoke-cured specimen for Regan's private collection, but who'd have believed the old skunk had it in for me? I never harmed him. On the contrary, I always considered him father's best friend. If Charlie Tippery could only come through with some of the Tippery surplus coin, or if the United States would only declare a moratorium, Bascom hoped equally hopelessly. And Reagan, at that moment, was saying to his assembled agents and rumor factory specialists, "Sell, sell, sell all you've got, and then sell short. I see no bottom to this market." And Francis, on his way uptown buying the last extra, scanned the 5-inch lettered headline, "I see no bottom to this market. Thomas Regan." But Francis was not at his house at 8 next morning to meet Charlie Tippery. It had been a night in which official Washington had not slept, and the night wires had carried the news out over the land that the United States, though not at war, had declared its moratorium. Wakened out of his bed at 7 by Bascom in person, who brought the news, Francis had accompanied him downtown. The moratorium had given them hope, and there was much to do. Charles Tippery, however, was not the first to arrive at the Riverside Drive Palace. A few minutes before 8, Parker was very much disturbed and perturbed when Henry and Leoncia, much the worse for sunburn and travel stain, brushed past the second butler who had opened the door. "It's no use your coming in this way," Parker assured them. "Mr. Morgan is not at home." "Where's he gone?" Henry demanded, shifting the suitcase he carried to the other hand. "We've got to see him pronto, and I'll have you know that pronto means quick. And who in hell are you?" "I am Mr. Morgan's confidential valet," Parker answered solemnly. "And who are you?" "My name's Morgan," Henry answered shortly, looking about in quest of something, striding to the library, glancing in and discovering the telephones. "Where's Francis?" "With what number can I call him up?" Mr. Morgan left express instructions that nobody was to telephone him except on important business. "Well, my business is important. What's the number?" "Mr. Moore." "Morgan is very busy today," Parker reiterated stubbornly. "He's in a pretty bad way, eh?" Henry quizzed. The valet's face remained expressionless. "Looks as though he was going to be cleaned out today, eh?" Parker's face betrayed neither emotion nor intelligence. "For a second time I tell you he is very busy," he began. "Hell's bells," Henry interrupted. "It's no secret. The market's got him where the hair's short. Everybody knows that. A lot of it was in the morning papers. Now come across, Mr. Confidential Valet. I want his number. I've got important business with him myself." But Parker remained obdurate. "What's his lawyer's name, or the name of his agent? Or of any of his representatives?" Parker shook his head. "If you will tell me the nature of your business with him," the valet essayed. Henry dropped the suitcase and made as if about to leap upon the other and shake Francis's number out of him. But Leoncia intervened. "Tell him," she said. "Tell him," Henry shouted, accepting her suggestion. "I'll do better than that. I'll show him." "Here, come on, you." He strode into the library, swung the suitcase on the reading table, and began opening it. "Listen to me, Mr. Confidential Valet. Our business is the real business. We're going to save Francis Morgan. We're going to pull him out of the hole. We've got millions for him, right here inside of this thing." Parker, who had been looking on with cold, disapproving eyes, recoiled in alarm at the last words. Either the strange callers were lunatics or cunning criminals. Even at that moment, while they held him here with their talk of millions, Confederates might be ransacking the upper parts of the house. As for the suitcase, for all he knew it might be filled with dynamite. "Here!" With a quick reach, Henry had caught him by the collar as he turned to flee. With his other hand, Henry lifted the cover, exposing a bushel of uncut gems. Parker showed plainly that he was overcome, although Henry failed to guess the nature of his agitation. "Thought I'd convince you," Henry exulted. "Now be a good dog and give me his number." "Be seated, sir, and madame," Parker murmured, with polite bows and a successful effort to control himself. "Be seated, please. I have left the private number in Mr. Morgan's bedroom, which he gave to me this morning when I helped him dress. I shall be gone but a moment to get it. In the meantime, please be seated." Once outside the library, Parker became a most active, clear-thinking person. Stationing the second footman at the front door, he placed the scouting into the upper regions on the chance of surprising possible Confederates at their nefarious work. Himself he addressed via the butler's telephone to the nearest police station. "Yes, sir," he repeated to the desk sergeant. "They are either a couple of lunatics or criminals. Send a patrol wagon at once, please, sir. Even now I do not know what horrible crimes are being committed under this roof." In the meantime, in response at the front door, the second footman, with visible relief, admitted Charlie Tippery, clad in evening dress at that early hour, as a known and tried friend of the master. The first butler, with similar relief, to which he added sundry winks and warnings, admitted him into the library. Expecting he knew not what nor whom, Charlie Tippery advanced across the large room to the strange man and woman. Unlike Parker, their sunburn and travel stain caught his eye, not as insignia suspicious, but as tokens worthy of wider consideration than average. New York accords its more or less average visitors. Leoncia's beauty was like a blow between the eyes, and he knew she was a lady. Henry's bronze, brazed upon features unmistakably reminiscent of Francis and of R.H.M., drew his admiration and respect. "Good morning," he addressed Henry, although he subtly embraced Leoncia with his greeting. "Friends of Francis." "Oh, sir," Leoncia cried out, "we are more than friends. We are here to save him." "I have read the morning papers. If only it weren't for the stupidity of the servants." And Charlie Tippery was immediately unaware of any slightest doubt. He extended his hand to Henry. "I am Charlie Tippery," he said. "And my name's Morgan, Henry Morgan." Henry met him warmly, like a drowning man clutching at a life-preserver. "And this is Miss Solano, the Señorita Solano, Mr. Tippery." "In fact, Miss Solano is my sister. I came on the same errand," Charlie Tippery announced, introductions over. "The saving of Francis, as I understand it, must consist of hard cash or of securities indisputably negotiable. I have brought with me what I have hustled all night to get, and what I am confident is not sufficient." "How much have you brought?" Henry asked bluntly. 1,800,000. What have you brought?" "Piffle," said Henry, pointing to the open suitcase, unaware that he talked to a 3 generations gem expert. A quick examination of a dozen of the gems picked at random, and an even quicker eye estimate of the quantity, put wonder and excitement into Charlie Tippery's face. "They're worth millions." "Millions!" he exclaimed. "What are you going to do with them?" "Negotiate them so as to help Francis out," Henry answered. "They're security for any amount, aren't they?" "Close up the suitcase," Charlie Tippery cried, "while I telephone. I want to catch my father before he leaves the house," he explained over his shoulder while waiting for his switch. "It's only 5 minutes' run from here." Just as he concluded the brief words with his father, Parker, followed by a police lieutenant and 2 policemen, entered. "There's the gang, Lieutenant. Arrest them," Parker said. "Oh, sir, I beg your pardon, Mr. Tippery. Not you, of course. Only the other 2, Lieutenant. I don't know what the charge will be. Crazy, anyway, if not worse. Which is more likely?" "How do you do, Mr. Tippery?" the lieutenant greeted familiarly. "You'll arrest nobody, Lieutenant Burns," Charlie Tippery smiled to him. "You can send the wagon back to the station. I'll square it with the inspector. For you're coming along with me and this suitcase and these suspicious characters to my house. You'll have to be bodyguard. Oh, not for me, but for this suitcase. There are millions in it, cold millions, hard millions, beautiful millions. When I open it before my father, you'll see a sight given to few men in this world to see. And now, come on, everybody. We're wasting time." He made a grab at the suitcase simultaneously with Henry, and, as both their hands clutched it, Lieutenant Burns sprang to interfere. "I fancy I'll carry it until it's negotiated," Henry asserted. "Surely, surely," Charlie Tippery conceded. "As long as we don't lose any more precious time. It will take time to do the negotiating. Come on, hustle." Chapter 29. Helped tremendously by the moratorium, the sagging market had ceased sagging, and some stocks were even beginning to recover. This was true for practically every line save those lines in which Francis owned and which Reagan was bearing. He continued bearing and making them reluctantly fall, and he noted with joy the huge blocks of Tampico petroleum which were being dumped obviously by no other person than Francis. "Now's the time," Regan informed his bear conspirators. "Play her coming and going. It's a double rough. Remember the list I gave you. Sell these and sell short. For them there is no bottom. As for all the rest, buy and buy now, and deliver all that you sold. You can't lose, you see, and by continuing to hammer the list you'll make a double killing. How about yourself?" one of his bear crowd queried. "I've nothing to buy," came the answer. "That will show you how square I have been in my tip and how confident I am. I haven't sold a share outside the list, so I have nothing to deliver. I am still selling short and hammering down the list, and the list only. There's my killing, and you can share in it by as much as you continue to sell short." "There you are," Bascom, in despair in his private office, cried to Francis at 10:30. "Here's the whole market rising except your lines. Reagan's out for blood. I never dreamed he could show such strength. We can't stand this. We're finished. We're smashed now. You, me, all of us. Everything." Never had Francis been cooler. Since all was lost, why worry? Was his attitude, and, a mere layman in the game, he caught a glimpse of possibilities that were veiled to Bascom, who too thoroughly knew too much about the game. "Take it easy," Francis counseled, his new vision assuming form and substance with each tick of a second. "Let's have a smoke and talk it over for a few minutes." Bascom made a gesture of infinite impatience. "But wait," Francis urged. "Stop! Look! Listen! I'm finished, you say?" His broker nodded. "You're finished!" Again the nod. "Which means that we're busted, flat busted," Francis went on to the exposition of his new idea. "Now it is perfectly clear, then, to your mind and mine, that a man can never be worse than a complete, perfect 100%, entire, total bust." "We're wasting valuable time," Bascom protested as he nodded affirmation. "Not if we're busted as completely as you've agreed we are," smiled Francis. being thoroughly busted. Time, sales, purchases, nothing can be of any value to us. Values have ceased, don't you see? Go on, what is it? Bascom said with the momentarily assumed patience of abject despair. I'm busted higher than a kite now, and, as you say, they can't bust me any higher. Now you get the idea, Francis jubilated. You're a member of the exchange. Then go ahead, sell or buy, do anything your and my merry hearts decide. We can't lose. Anything from zero always leaves zero. We've shot all we've got, and more. Let's shoot what we haven't got. Bascom still struggled feebly to protest, but Francis beat him down with a final, remember, anything from zero leaves zero. And for the next hour, as in a nightmare, no longer a free agent, Bascom yielded to Francis's will in the maddest stock adventure of his life. Oh, well, Francis laughed at 11:30. We might as well quit now, but remember, we're no worse off than we were an hour ago. We were zero then, we're zero now. You can hang up the auctioneer's flag any time now. Bascom, heavily and wearily taking down the receiver, was about to transmit the orders that would stop the battle by acknowledgement of unconditional defeat, when the door opened and through it came the familiar ring of a pirate's stave that made Francis flash his hand out in peremptory stoppage of his broker's arm. "Stop," Francis cried. "Listen!" And they listened to the song preceding the singer, back to back against the mainmast, held at bay the entire crew. As Henry swaggered in, carrying a huge and different suitcase, Francis joined with him in the stave. "What's doing?" Bascom queried of Charlie Tippery, who, still in evening dress, looked very jaded and worn from his exertions. From his breast pocket he drew and passed over 3 certified checks that totaled $1,800,000. Bascom shook his head sadly. "Too late," he said. "That's only a drop in the bucket. Put them back in your pocket." "It would be only throwing them away." "But wait!" Charlie Tippery cried, taking the suitcase from his singing companion and proceeding to open it. "Maybe that will help." That consisted of a great mass of orderly bundles of gold bonds and gilt-edged securities. "How much is it?" Bascom gasped, his courage springing up like wildfire. But Francis, overcome by the sight of such plethora of ammunition, ceased singing to gasp. And both he and Bascom gasped again when Henry drew from his inside pocket a bundle of 12 certified checks. They could only stare at the prodigious sum, for each was written for $1 million. "And plenty more where that came from," Henry announced airily. "All you have to do is say the word, Francis, and we'll knock this bear gang to smithereens. Now suppose you get busy. The rumors are around everywhere that you're gone and done for. Pitch in and show them, that's all. Bust every last one of them that jumped you. Shake 'em down to their gold watches and the fillings out of their teeth." "You found old Sir Henry's treasure after all," Francis congratulated. "No?" Henry shook his head. "That represents part of the old Maya treasure, about a third of it. We've got another third down with Enrico Solano, and the last third safe right here in the Jewelers and Traders National Bank. Say, I've got news for you when you're ready to listen." And Francis was quickly ready. Bascom knew even better than he what was to be done, and was already giving his orders to his staff over the telephone, buying orders of such prodigious size that all of Regan's fortune would not enable him to deliver what he had sold short. "Torres is dead," Henry told him. "Hurrah," was Francis's way of receiving it. "Died like a rat in a trap. I saw his head sticking out. It wasn't pretty. And the Effe's dead. And somebody else is dead." "Not Leoncia," Francis cried out. Henry shook his head. "Someone of the Solanos. Old Enrico. Old Enrico." "No, your wife, Mrs. Morgan. Torres shot her, deliberately shot her. I was beside her when she fell." Now hold on, I've got other news. Leoncia's right there in that other office, and she's waiting for you to come to her. Can't you wait till I'm through? I've got more news that will give you the right steer before you go into her. Why, hell's bells, if I were a certain Chinaman that I know, I'd make you pay me $1 million for all the information I'm giving you for nothing. Shoot. What is it? Francis demanded impatiently. Good news, of course. Unadulterated good news. Best news you ever heard. Now, don't laugh or knock my block off, for the good news is that I've got a sister. What of it? Was Francis's brusque response. I always knew you had sisters in England. But you don't get me, Henry dragged on. This is a perfectly brand new sister, all grown up, and the most beautiful woman you ever laid eyes on. And what of it? Growled Francis. That may be good news for you, but I don't see how it affects me. Ah, now we're coming to it, Henry grinned. You're going to marry her. I give you my full permission. Not if she were 10 times your sister, nor if she were 10 times as beautiful, Francis broke in. The woman doesn't exist I'd marry. Just the same, Francis boy, you're going to marry this one. I know it. I feel it in my bones. I'd bet on it. I'll bet you 1,000. I don't. Oh, go on and make it a real bet, Henry drawled. Any amount you want. Done then for $1,050. Now go right into the office there and take a look at her. She's with Leoncia? Nope, she's by herself. I thought you said Leoncia was in there. So I did. And so Leoncia is in there. And she isn't with another soul, and she's waiting to talk with you. By this time, Francis was growing peevish. What are you stringing me for? He demanded. I can't make head nor tail of your foolery. One moment it's your brand new sister in there, and the next moment it's your wife. Who said I ever had a wife? Henry came back. I give up, Francis cried. I'm going on in and see Leoncia. I'll talk with you later on when you're back in your right mind. He started for the door but was stopped by Henry. Just a second more, Francis, and I'm done, he said. I want to give you that steer. I am not married. There is only one woman waiting for you in there. That one woman is my sister. Also is she Leoncia. It required a dazed half-minute for Francis to get it clearly into his head. Again, and in a rush, he was starting for the door when Henry stopped him. Do I win? Queried Henry. But Francis shook him off, dashed through the door, and slammed it after him.